night on the show, we discussed the latest so-called Extinction Rebellion protest in Brisbane and the kid-glove treatment that activists have received from police and magistrates. And sadly, you're the ones paying for it all. In fact, you're paying for it 3 times over. You're paying to sit in traffic, wasting time and money. You're paying tax so that they can live on welfare and have the free time to disrupt your day. And you're paying for all the police expenses that these repetitive protests cost the taxpayer. But finally, it now seems that the government, at least federally, is saying enough is enough. Here's Queensland-based Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton on Radio 2GB with Ray Hadley this morning.
Well, the first thing that should happen is you won't go to work, you're bludgers, you're sitting on your backsides gluing yourself to roads. You won't be getting paid by us.
Well, I agree. And I'll tell you the other thing that should happen, Ray, is that people should take these names and the photos of these people and distribute them as far and wide as they can so that we shame these people, shame them because of the actions that they've committed and because they're acting outside of the law and against community standards. Let their families know what you think of their behaviour.
A former police detective, Dutton took a typically robust approach, demanding that repeat protesters be fined, jailed and or lose the dole. And why shouldn't they? They're hardly meeting their mutual obligations to look for work when they're supergluing themselves to the roads, are they? The usual suspects on the left, well, they went into overdrive at Dutton's comments, I might add. But if you were to walk into any pub or restaurant in Brisbane tonight, he's only said on air what I reckon the majority of patrons would say if asked for their view. We're told there's going to be more of these nonsense protests next week to mark what's been dubbed International Rebellion Week, with major disruptions planned for every day, and you can bet on it. These protests are going to spread if they're not vigorously dealt with in Brisbane. How do you think the notoriously politically correct Victorian government would react to Extinction Rebellion protesters in Melbourne? Probably send out a minister to cheer them on, I suspect. I mean, Victoria's a state where if you're a Conservative and you've got something to say that the left don't like, you're likely to be fined for protests that will inevitably eventuate, rather than the people protesting footing the bill for their often violent disruptions. And today there was yet another example of just how politically correct policing in the state of Victoria has become, with news that the Box Hill police station flew the red Chinese flag over the top of the station yesterday to mark the 70th anniversary of the communist Chinese takeover. Now, I accept that there are lots of Australians of Chinese background who perhaps feel benign towards the Chinese government, especially recent migrants who credit the Communist Party rather than the Chinese people themselves for that country's economic miracle. But there are many other Chinese-descended Australians who came here precisely to get away from communist rule, which, let's face it, was responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of its own people through the so-called Great Leap Forward in the Cultural Revolution, which is now bullying its neighbours in the South China Sea, and which, even now, is poised to crack down on millions of pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. Can you imagine the furor if a police station was to fly, let's say, the Star of David to mark the upcoming 75 years of the State of Israel in a few years' time over the top of a police station, even though Israel, well, it's the only liberal, pluralist democracy in the Middle East. The pro-Palestinian Labor types, well, they'd be up in arms, not to mention the Greens. Yet barely a word is said when a Melbourne police station puts up the red Chinese flag on the same day that tanks and missiles were rumbling through Beijing, in a warning to the rest of the region and the wider world that China is becoming a bigger and stronger presence, and don't we forget it. Now, I suppose I shouldn't be too hard on the local police commander who gormlessly thought that hoisting the communist flag would be a community relations coup. But what does it say about the judgment and the underlying attitudes of people in authority? This sort of nonsense happens far too often. Too many flag days, days for this, ribbons for that, badges for everything, and all the while, the basic job we employ our police to do is seemingly third or fourth priority of the police command hierarchy. Let me be clear, not the everyday police officer, but the police bureaucracy. I have to say, when it comes to our national symbols, I confess I'm pretty conservative here. For me, it's the Australian flag and none other. Now, I'll concede perhaps the Aboriginal flag on NIDOC week, but not every day. And I'm okay with a state flag on occasion too, but neither of these flags should ever be on a flagpole that it's at the same height as the one flag, the Australian flag, that unites us all.